Hello, everyone. We're gonna get started. Thanks for coming today. Let's see, can we get the slideshow up? Great. So today's session is supporting systems change via direct holistic legal services. My name is Tyler Press Sutherland. I'm the Director of Racial Justice at the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles. Maybe I can do this. Okay. The Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles is a nonprofit law firm that protects and advances the rights of the most underserved, leveling the playing field and ensuring that everyone can access to the justice system. Each year, we serve over 100,000 clients across our 5 offices and 4 self-help centers. I'm happy to introduce my colleagues joining me today. First on the left, we have Marvell Faulkner, a staff attorney in Lafla's Restoring Communities Work Group. Marvell is a graduate of Cal State University, Fresno, with a bachelor's in philosophy and a graduate of Pepperdine University School of Law. He's the lead attorney on Lafla's Doors Reentry program, which serves clients affected by post-conviction issues and works with criminal justice-related community-based organizations to provide holistic services. He's the brains behind today's panel, and we are excited to hear and learn from you today, Marvell. Next, we have Tyler Nicole Smith, managing attorney of Lafla's Veterans Justice Center. Previously, she served as a staff attorney with Lafla's Restoring Communities Work Group, where she used her expertise in criminal law and post-conviction relief to advocate for expansion of criminal records expungements and reduction and cancellation of criminal debt. In that role, she also provided legal services to justice-impacted Los Angeles residents at the Watts Labor Community Action Committee, where she focused on removing legal barriers caused by criminal backgrounds. Prior to joining Lafla, Tyler was a staff attorney at the Legal Aid Society of Orange County in the Clean Slate Unit, focusing on post-conviction relief. Before that, she served as a criminal defense attorney defending adult and juvenile defendants in felony, misdemeanor, DUI, rape, assault, drug, and theft cases throughout Southern California. She obtained her bachelor's degree in economics from Spelman College and her JD from Suffolk University School of Law in Boston. So today we are going to have a brief presentation on the civil justice gap. Then we will talk about the role of legal aid in movement lawyering. I will then start our panel portion where I will ask our 2 panelists a bunch of questions, and there will also be time for Q&A. And to start off, since we have an intimate group in the room, I would love to hear from everyone in the audience. I had a slide where I was asking who you are, but I actually think since we have an intimate group that I should actually just hear who all of you are so that we can tailor our presentation accordingly. So if you wouldn't mind, I'm gonna bring the, got an extra one. I'll bring the mic down and you guys can go around and say, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Name, pronouns, organization.
Hi, my name's Jen Jenkins. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a policy advocate at the Legal Aid Society of the District of Columbia.
My name is Natalie Murphy. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an intern with Baltimore Action Legal Team.
Hello, my name is Ilana Christian. I am also an intern at Detroit Justice Center for this summer.
Hey there, Chinyere Azia, she, her. I'm with the Center for Constitutional Rights.
Hi, thank you. My name is David Pina. I use he, they pronouns, and I'm the staff attorney for Chainless Change in South Florida, direct services branching out to community and movement learning.
Hi, I'm Azure Wheeler. She, her. I'm an attorney with the Open Society Justice Initiative.
Hi, my name is Raven Durantes, she, her, hers, managing attorney with Urban Justice Center, doing housing justice work.
Hi, I'm Shannon Bush, she, her pronouns. I'm a paralegal with Arch City Defenders doing both direct representation and civil rights litigation.
Hi, I'm Sarah Galloway, she, her pronouns. I'm a staff attorney with Arch City Defenders. I'm doing direct representation.
William Waller, he, him pronouns, managing attorney for direct representation at Arch City Defenders.
Continuing with the row, my name is Jessica Estes. I use she, her pronouns, and I am Director of Partnerships with Arch City Defenders.
Hi, I'm Yvonne Hollins. I use she, her pronouns, and I am with Action St. Louis, and we partner with Arch City Defenders.
Good afternoon, Sharice Liu, she, her pronouns. I'm an attorney with the Public Justice Center in Maryland.
All right, thank you, everyone. It sounds like we have a lot of attorneys who are already doing direct legal services in the room, which is good to hear. So I'm going to speed through my presentation because I hope this can then be more of a discussion, and I would love to hear your responses to some of the questions that I asked Tyler and Marvell as well. Because I think you all are very familiar with the civil justice gap. And the idea was that we wanted to make sure that everyone understood the extreme disparities that we're experiencing. And in the civil legal aid field, there are two reasons that people do not seek services: the knowledge gap and the service gap. And our knowledge gap is that people in our communities often do not know that the problem that they are experiencing has a legal component, or that there is a legal remedy for that problem, or where to look for help with that legal remedy. And then the second part of that is the service gap, which is that people who seek help for their problems do not receive adequate help to resolve the problems. And so going through like how big the knowledge gap is, it's only 25% of people who sought help, or only 21% of people who had a legal problem in 2021 sought help for that legal problem. And that is just abysmally low. That's most people are dealing with these problems on their own. And that is, well, we'll touch on later why it's so important for us to get embedded in the communities so that people know of our existence as legal aid organizations and know what resources that they can turn to. And the service gap, which you all are very aware of, is based on economics and the number of people in the field. And so the slide outlines the economics of the situation for most Americans. The rate of an attorney is just far too high for people to be able to afford someone who's in private practice. And then the flip side of the service gap is there are over 1.3 million lawyers in the United States, and there's 5,000 of us. And there's a lot of them in this room and a lot of them in this conference. But that just means that there just are not enough attorneys to assist the people who have problems. And so there's a component of racial and economic disparities that exacerbates both the service gap and the knowledge gap for BIPOC communities because of wealth disparities and the individual and systemic racism that people experience when interacting with our bureaucratic systems, which further exacerbates the problem for BIPOC folk who are seeking help in the legal system. And then lastly, I'll touch on the lawyer problem, which is the demographics of the legal profession do not reflect the demographics of our country. In the United States, we have about 13% of folks who wrote back on their census identify as Black or African American. And yet over the last decade, it's held steady at about only 5% of attorneys are Black. The US is about 18% Latinx, and yet only 5% of attorneys are Hispanic or Latino. And the US is about almost 6% Asian American, and yet only 2% of attorneys identify as Asian. And so what does this mean? It means that our communities of color are not being served by people of color, and there is a pipeline problem, which all of these things together compound several issues that hopefully we will dive into today. This is a little bit about who Lafla is serving. So our client demographics are about 27% Black, 36% Hispanic or Latinx, 17% white, and 7% Asian. And all of those are an overrepresentation or an underrepresentation of the Los Angeles County population. Los Angeles County is about 49% Latinx, 26% white, 15% Asian, and 8% Black. So Black folk are overrepresented in our client population, and Latinx, white, and Asian American clients are underrepresented. And so we all need to be thinking very deeply about why that is and what we are doing to contribute to those problems and what we can do to help correct some of them. And that will be hopefully addressed a little bit in our panel later. And so jumping into what the role of legal aid and movement lawyering is, in this morning session, Thanjawe said it best. We have to deal with the material needs of our people as part of movement lawyering. And it's an important component of base building. You can't organize when you're experiencing an eviction. You won't get to a protest if your car has been impounded. And so what is the role of legal aid organizations is to help address the needs of the individuals who will power the movements that we care so deeply about. And so a couple of things to think about and things that we're going to talk about in our panel, just to preview them, is that, as I said before, our numbers are few. There's 5,000 of us in civil legal aid, but there's over 1 million attorneys out there. And are we leveraging pro bono and people who are outside of our organizations to expand capacity? Are we doing our best at pattern identification and helping feed information to those who need it? And how are we in relationship with our community-based organizations? And lastly, we'll dive a little bit into how legal aids choose to engage with impact litigation and what those limitations might be, and the same for policy work. And with that, I think we will turn off the PowerPoint and I will start this conversation. Okay. So to start off, let's do a little bit of level setting. And can you tell us how you define holistic legal services and talk a little bit about how holistic legal services support Black communities?
I can go first, I guess. My idea of holistic legal services is not just kind of being the attorney and having like an office that is somewhere in the community. My idea of holistic legal services being in the rooms where the conversations about movement are happening. That means like going to community organizing events, talking to their leadership, and identifying ways in which we can use the resources that we have at legal aid to address some of those legal issues. For example, one of the programs that I was working with prior to becoming managing attorney of the Veterans Unit was a holistic legal, actually a holistic project around those who are reentering following incarceration. So A part of that services, we provided legal services, we provided behavioral health services, and employment services all in one location, where folks who were being released from incarceration were regularly released. So instead of them having to find us once they get out, getting a list of places where they can get warm referrals or making calls to find out where they can go, we were right there on the spot waiting for them with services that they needed right away. And additionally, now in this role with veterans, being able to provide them with services, not just at the VA where they always are, but also in areas where they feel comfortable and where they feel safe, so that they can have that comfortability in talking to us about sometimes their most vulnerable issues, and feeling like they're able to be heard and get the resources that they need. I think that for me, that feels like the best way to support Black communities, because I have found that there is a lot of distrust, specifically with legal aid, because most of the legal aid attorneys are white folks. And you don't want to talk to a white person about a racial issue that you're having with your landlord, because they don't have a good understanding about how that not only affects your ability to have a place to live, but that's affecting you mentally and emotionally. And so being able to be that face for them, that's like, okay, I'm comfortable talking to you, you look like me, and you have the knowledge and the resources to help me, really helps us to be able to build relationships with them, build relationships with their community, while also being able to provide that direct legal service.
And for me, well, I'm only about a year out of law school. And in law school, we were trained to spot legal issues. So someone comes into our office and tells us what's going on, and we were trained to spot the legal issues in their stories, identify the laws that apply, and then figure out how we can help using the law. I even did a legal clinic through my school on Skid Row in Los Angeles. And Skid Row is notorious for being one of the largest stable populations of unhoused people in the United States. And it was the same. As you can imagine, the people who were coming in were faced with a lot of issues and challenges. And including like drug addiction, over policing, and mental health issues. And they trained us to listen to someone's story and figure out how we can support them through only legal services. And I think what I've learned through direct legal services and in my position now is how important it is to listen with an ear towards how I might be able to help the individual with all of the issues affecting their quality life, or their quality of life, or their livelihoods. I often hear people say, especially in the legal profession, you can't help everybody with everything. And I sit back and think, well, I'm going to try. And if I can't help, the least I can do is provide them with the resources to get help. So holistic legal services to me is providing people with the resources in all areas where they might be struggling. And this supports the Black community, because the Black community is often impacted by more than just like the criminal legal system. Black people and all people who are considered minority are impacted by governmental programs, housing programs, county programs, and more, which often are failing them in some way. And clients are not experiencing these things one thing at a time. They're experiencing all of these issues at the same time. So by providing legal services to help with their legal issues, and then giving them other resources to help any problems they might have, we provide them with the tools to help change their whole situation and not just their legal status. So yeah, to me, holistic services is providing people with resources in all areas.
Yeah, I think those are really, really good definitions to start us off. And movement lawyering is about the relationships that you build with community organizations, and then the work we can do alongside. So how have you gone about relationship building as a legal aid attorney? What community organizations have you worked with, and how have you partnered with them?
Sure, I'll go first. So I work in a building that's part of a reentry center. It's called DOORS, and that stands for Developing Opportunities and Offering Reentry Solutions. And in that building, there's a lot of community organizations that help with the range of things that people might be affected by in their life. So by listening to who I'm servicing with an ear towards how I can be of service to them, period, not just legally, I let them know how I can help with their legal issues, but then I go back and confirm that they're actually having issues with housing or mental health or family reunification or finding employment. And then I ask for permission to link them with other community organizations that help with resources in those areas. And then I do what we call a warm referral, so that I give them the other organizations their name and number, and they reach out to that individual directly, so the client doesn't have to do more work. So essentially in this building, I'm working with social workers, housing navigators, employment specialists, anger management counselors, and more, to give our clients the best chance against a system that is failing to provide them with the tools that they need to survive.
I definitely agree. I think one thing that I have done to help build relationships is listening. As lawyers, we tend to listen for legal issues because we're there to spot legal issues. That's what we learn in law school. But actually just listening to what those organizations are already doing, and not just service providers, but organizers are doing, to help identify where legal services could fit in for their benefit. So not really selling myself as an attorney or selling legal aid as an option for them, but listening to determine whether there is even anything that we can do, or if they would like for us to be a part of what they're doing in general. And figuring out ways that I can participate, or ways that I can link my coworkers to participate in some of the local work that's being done, because our work doesn't always just have to be figuring out a legal issue and going to court and filing things, but can also be that movement and gathering folks and letting our clients know and being able to help build the movement that way. Some court community organizations that I have worked with, Tyler mentioned earlier, is the Watts Labor Community Action Committee in Watts. It is the oldest Black-led community organization. They provide services from housing to now legal services since I've been there, to farmers markets for folks in the community to be able to get food, family resources, employment resources. And that is a space where folks feel comfortable, where they have lots of local community meetings, and being able to partner with them to help identify folks that I need to be talking to, rooms that I need to be in, is how I have worked with partners and done all the things.
Yeah, and I would just add, sometimes as lawyers, we are given a seat at the table by governmental agencies before other folks are. And one thing that Lafla has done, in my previous role, I was a government benefits attorney, and we were asked regularly to attend meetings with the county welfare department, to address benefits related issues. And one of the things that we did was we insisted on bringing some of our community partners who were on the ground organizations, who were, very invested in different communities than Lafla was, to the table. And so, for example, we brought our, very close partners, Maternal and Child Health Access, which works generally enrolling immigrant populations in benefits, WIC benefits, food stamp benefits, all sorts of benefits, but they're, a direct service CBO, not providing any legal representation. And they were originally not asked to the table. And we said, we'll come to these meetings, but we're bringing them with us. And so bringing in your partners to make sure that they're in these, important conversations with decision makers is a really important thing that we sometimes can be these gatekeepers for, reasons that are due to the systemic patriarchy. And like, we have to make sure that we utilize every opportunity we have to bring everyone to the table together. Because, lawyers don't have all the answers, but if we can bring along people with some more direct experience and lived experience, that's really helpful. So for my next question, here we go. The next question builds upon that. So how have you been able to use your partnerships that you just talked about to support systemic change?
Sure, I guess I'll go first on this one. So one thing that I have done in some of the reentry work is around kind of education building. So part of what the reentry program I was working with previously would have job fairs with kind of felony friendly or criminal background friendly job providers. And one of the laws that the Lafla had been working on had to do with kind of the background check and screening processes for individuals with criminal record backgrounds. And so now in the state of California, we have Ban the Box, which I'm sure folks have heard about, but we were having lots of issues with employers either knowingly or unknowingly continuously violating that law and denying folks jobs because of their backgrounds. And so part of the relationship that I have with Watts is that I was able to work with them to educate the individuals that they had coming to the job fair on those new laws. So as a way for the job providers to get into the job fair and to be able to market their jobs, they had to be educated on the fact that we have a Ban the Box law and that you cannot do the following things. These are the things that you have to do if you are thinking about potentially denying somebody for their criminal background. And so I was able to kind of basically leverage and use that partnership to provide that education to prevent this systemic issue of employers violating folks' rights by continuously denying them jobs. That's one example, but I think in general, some of the things that I tend to do is do that community education with organizations. So not necessarily focusing on, hey, this is a major issue that's happening, but focusing on the new laws that are coming out so that they can also encourage folks to come to us so that when those things happen, we can file lawsuits, we can go to the courts if we need to additionally affect systemic change.
And I'd say just working in the building that I work with and all the community organizations that I work with, by making sure that we're working with one client to make sure that they're receiving all of the services that they need or might be interested in. This is important because we are building a coalition between each other and the community. We're building a rapport with each other. We're talking every day. I have their desks are right next to mine. So we're talking about and brainstorming about systemic change and the faults in the system and the faults in the governmental programs. And we're trying to figure out how the community, how we can help the community and each other when people fall through these cracks of the governmental systems to organize and work towards complete systemic change.
And I would just add another place where I've partnered with community organizations is there is a pretty large movement in Los Angeles and all around the country. I think there was a session about it earlier this morning around defunding the family regulation system, also known as the child welfare system. And in Los Angeles, we're part of a coalition called the Reimagined Child Safety Coalition, which is an organization that is founded by some BLM members. And we are working in partnership to completely reform or abolish, we'll see how it goes, the way that our Department of Children and Family Services works. And it's led by community organizers. We welcome lots of folks with lived experience into the space, and we make democratic decisions in a way that is not the typical way that I've experienced these types of coalitions in the past. And it's been to so far some success. We've had some movement with our Board of Supervisors to pass a motion to fund pre-petition representation of parents, which is such an important component to why, the system is so unfair, is that parents have no idea what's going on, no representation, no one to turn to, and their children are being ripped out of their arms. And so that motion, which was just passed about 2 months ago at this point, is our first win. But I think it really shows the power that we have in this coalition and in moving things forward. And we're, as the lawyers, we're just on the team. We're flanking. I think that was said early in a different session I was in today, that we're there to flank the community organizers who are really pushing it forward, but we're there to provide comments on the motion when we were asked, and then it's moved forward, at this point and been passed. So that's just one other place that we've been working in partnership with community organizations. So let's see. So let's talk a bit now about pro bono, because as I said, this is a place that we have, there's a lot of underutilized manpower. And how do you view the role of pro bono, and how could it be improved?
I'll go.
I can go. Just let me know.
So I'm a pretty new attorney, so I have an interesting view of pro bono. And in our organization, I work with the Restoring Communities work group. And what we do is we mainly file expungement petitions for people to get their records clear, so that they can go forward without having these restrictions of having a felony on their record. So how we facilitate pro bono is we bring pro bonos in and supervise them while they fill out the petitions, and then they interview clients to help fill out a declaration, which is just something for the judge to read in consideration of whether or not they grant the expungement petition. And after that, they turn the petition back into us, and then we rarely hear from them again, or I rarely hear from them again. And then the client that they were working with doesn't hear from them at all, doesn't see them, probably even remember their name. So for me, pro bono has been a way for attorneys to just come in and then out, and not really putting an investment into the community and doing the work that is support and uplift these communities. And I think it can be improved by actually having pro bonos come in and invest in the community by using their knowledge to support the community. And when I say investing, I don't mean just money. I mean time and effort, to actually follow up with these clients, to listen to people in the community, build relationships with them, and then using the resources that they have at their firms to actually support the community's needs.
I have to agree. I think the actual role of pro bonos is, like Tyler said previously in our presentation, is about expanding our capacity. We all know, as legal aid lawyers, we don't get paid very much. Our recruitment tends to be very low. People don't tend to stay around for that long. And so as much as we as individual attorneys want to be able to help everyone and do everything, we don't have the time and capacity to do that all the time. So being able to bring in an outside attorney who has at least the basic legal skills to be able to do that work with additional clients is really helpful. Unfortunately, what we've seen with pro bonos is that they essentially are just doing it to meet like our requirements for the bar, or are looking to do as many hours to get awarded for that because they have a plaque that they can put in their corner office. And we've seen very little actual investment in the work that we do as legal aid attorneys in terms of funding. And that means like cutting a check to us so that we can continue to do the work and hire the people. But it's also a lack of investment in wanting to come back and continuously do the work, to want to expand the type of work that they're doing, meaning not just filling out the forms, but going to the hearings and addressing the other legal issues that a client is having outside of just our clinic setting. So I think the ways that we can improve the way that we work with attorneys or with pro bono attorneys is really vetting them and making sure that they're invested in the work that we do and in the work that we do with our clients. That's like a harm reduction tactic, because we don't want folks from outside coming in and microaggressing our clients, or just coming in and not being committed truly to the work that we're doing. Ensuring that they're really ready to invest both their checkbooks and their time into this work.
And I would just add that I would love to hear from y'all about the ways that you effectively work with pro bono, if you are effectively working with pro bono, because that's an area where we are looking to grow and to help put our pro bono program on the movement lawyering track that I think the rest of our organization is already on. So hopefully when we get to the Q&A portion, if you've got any responses to that, I'd love to hear it. For my next question, so there's a lot of talk at this conference so far about building trust in our communities. And I think that that's something that we should all speak to as well. So how can you build trust in the communities we serve? And can you talk about some concrete examples of the way you've done that?
Sure, I guess it's my turn to go first on this one. I think kind of back to what I was saying before is going to the spaces where folks already are and listening and talking to the people who have already built relationships with that community, and being in their space helps them build trust to know that we're not just an outsider coming in to try to fix them or fix their issue, but that we are also community members. Additionally, I think it's really important that we build up our legal profession to have folks who look like the community. Like I said before, I'm sure most people know, unfortunately, a lot of the legal aid organizations are faces that don't look like the people who are in the community, are not from the community that they are currently serving. And that goes a very long way in building trust, because folks are comfortable with people who look like them, with people who are from a similar community or from their community, because there is that investment already. Like, you're invested in me as another Black person, you're invested in this community because you grew up here, you've seen the change, you are directly affected by the things that are happening. So I think that in order to build trust, specifically with legal aid organizations, it's finding the talent in the community and finding folks who are, if you're not from the community, who are invested in a true understanding of the community needs, and not coming in to try to fix and be that white savior, kind of white hat syndrome kind of thing. And in some ways that I have helped to build kind of trust with Lafla is, like I said, I think I said before, it's just attending their community meetings. So that's like just attending a town hall meeting so that you can have a good understanding of what are some of the complaints that community members are expressing to the electeds, because we only hear about them when they come in with an immediate case. But if we can hear about what's going on ahead of time, we can maybe head off some of those issues and start advocating in other ways before individuals come to us with their individual cases. I think really ingraining ourselves in the community and not just kind of being in our office waiting for folks to come to us, and going out into the communities and being a part of them as a community member is a great way to build trust.
Yeah, I echo everything Tyler said. I think the first step in building trust in the community is actually being in the community, being seen in the community, being seen as a resource in the community and for the community. I try to make an effort. The way I feel like I build trust in the community is I try to make an effort to every client I talk to let them know to use me as a resource. I am a resource. Ask me any questions that you may have. I might not know the answer, but chances are I can find someone who does know the answer. So I grew up and everyone around me feeling like we didn't have an access to justice because we couldn't afford an attorney, or we couldn't afford to go to someone who knew if we were having a legal issue or if we weren't. So I tried to be that resource to people who I see look like me or grew up where I grew up, just because I feel like it's important for the community to know that there's a resource available. And if not, there is at least an intermediary who can connect you with the resources that you need. So essentially what I try to do is pull, Lafla is a big organization. So I try to pull all the resources that our organization has and give them to the community. So essentially I'm an intermediary between our organization and the community. And I'm giving to the people exactly what they deserve to have is resources.
And my next question has also come up in several sessions, which I think was a good sign that these are issues that we're all facing. And how do you reconcile the tension between helping individuals and a deep-rooted desire to rip the entire system apart?
I will say that is difficult for me at times because I am a anarchist and I am a burn it down and let's rebuild kind of person. Yes, thank you. And so, and it can be difficult when you are a legal aid lawyer in general, because we have so many restrictions depending on how you're funded in terms of the type of work that we can do. And so something that I've done to kind of reconcile that tension is to go right up to the line on those restrictions. And if I can find a way around the line by working with other organizations that don't have those restrictions or working with the community to kind of circumvent that, that helps me to reconcile a little bit, and definitely leaning on the partner organizations. So we generally tend to have an idea of what the next steps are that need to be done, but we can't do them because of those restrictions. And so educating the community on like, hey, these are some things that you can do, and here are some places that you can go, and use me as that knowledge base, that resource, helps me feel like I am moving the issue forward despite the restrictions that we have.
And for me, there's a Toni Morrison quote that stuck with me as soon as I first heard it. She said that we should all do what we can from where we are. And from where I am, I feel like by helping as many individuals who look like me or grew up in the same areas that I grew up, that we need people to in those spaces and to occupy every single space that exists for us to move forward. So I feel like I'm occupying a space and doing so intentionally. I'm helping as many individuals as I can, and by doing that, I'm getting firsthand knowledge of the cracks in these systems and the cracks in these the implementing of the government programs and how people fall through the cracks. So that way, as I evolve into my career and with the knowledge of these cracks and how they work, and hopefully with a bit more actual power, I'm able to thoughtfully contribute to tearing, or how you said, tearing down the entire system, and maybe even leading the effort to do so. So yeah.
And I would just add, I think that at the end of the day, I used to practice government benefits law, and if I didn't help this client, they didn't have food to eat. And that was a powerful motivator, even though, you have to balance that with wanting to do, huge systems work or tearing down the system entirely. And I think that balancing your direct service work with impact litigation and policy work is the answer to that. And every organization should have wiggle room where you serve individual clients, of course, but that you also add to your caseload systems work. And so, the example that I have is, doing benefits work. If your EBT card gets skimmed or scammed, there was no reimbursement on this. And I had client after client come in and say, my EBT got skimmed. What can I do? What can I do? And there was no answer. The answer was the law says no. But, after my third client, I went to my boss and I said, this can't be right. This can't be right. Everybody knows these people are being just absolutely ripped off. The county knows it. The police know it. Everybody knows. Nobody thinks my client stole this money, but they just have to go hungry. And we started a campaign. We started a strategy. We worked with Hunger Action Network, which was the on the ground CBO who, was providing food because they're food pantry. Part of what their work does is they're a food pantry to help support folks when they were in this circumstance. When they got to the end of the month, they had no money, for food because their EBT had been skimmed. And we started a campaign and we brought litigation, and it took 3 years. And eventually we won in the Court of Appeals. And, the state of California luckily had some good other laws that said that they should have been obligated to reimburse. And now the state is required to reimburse. And then the second phase of this project is we're now codifying it in our state law and expanding it even beyond, because the obligation is really only for skimming, but scamming is now so prevalent with people getting convinced to give their PIN number up by, a caller on the cell phone. And we're codifying this law, and we're also going to add those protections for scammers. And it's like, it went from 3 individual clients that I had in 2015 to now the rules being changed and being protected in California. And you know what? Every state needs this. It probably needs to be a national rule, but until then, state by state, this can be clawed back. So just one example of, you start with your individual cases, you build up the information you have to hopefully work with your partners and make some changes. Let's see, and then this kind of leads into the next question. So what kinds of impact litigation or policy work have you been able to move forward?
Yes, I'll go. One of the things that I have been working on recently has been a new piece of legislation that's going through the California State Assembly surrounding FTAs, which are failures to appear for things like traffic citations and things like that. And generally what happens is if you fail to appear, warrant goes out for you, but also your license gets suspended. And a lot of the times folks don't even know that they have an FTA because the notices go out to an address that's probably old, or the notice gets returned and that's just it. Like nothing ever happens, but the court sends to the DMV the license suspension. And so a person is out riding around, they get stopped, they're either arrested or cited again. And so that tends to create even more issues, considering most of those folks are Black and brown people. They already live in neighborhoods that are over policed. Getting stopped by the police is incredibly dangerous for a Black and brown person. So it creates a even more dangerous system for something very simple like a traffic citation. And so the new piece of legislation that we're working on and that I've been able to testify on with the assembly is to change that law so that even if you have an FTA, your license doesn't automatically get suspended. You're not automatically getting a misdemeanor conviction on your record, all because you couldn't get a notice in the mail or you were just too afraid to go to court, because going to court for people of color is scary, especially when you have to go by yourself. And there's no entitlement to having an attorney when you go to traffic court. So what will happen with this new law is that you won't get that FTA, or you will get the FTA, but you won't get the license suspension and you won't have that misdemeanor conviction on your record. And it is hopefully once passed, will really help a lot of those folks who already have their licenses suspended so that they don't have to worry about driving around, trying to get to work, trying to get their families around, trying to get themselves to doctor's appointments, or whatever, and having that hanging over their head when they're just trying to live their life.
Yeah, you can't get anywhere in California without driving. So it's a very serious problem because our public transportation system is so woefully underserved and broken. So yeah, fingers crossed for that one.
Yeah, fingers crossed for that one. One that has been successful that we worked on a couple of years ago was surrounding criminal records and like the records that get cleared and how they still negatively affect folks who are applying for occupational licenses. Because in the state of California, even if a record is technically expunged by the court, meaning that they have gone back and dismissed the convictions and the court record itself is cleared, it doesn't get cleared with the Department of Justice. So when a person uses their fingerprints and they, get run for a job or for an occupational license, the conviction still appears. So all the information about the conviction appears. It'll just have a notation below that says, oh, the court dismissed this at a later date. And so what was happening is that folks would rehabilitate, they would get their record clear, they've done all this work, and then when they would try to go and get an occupational license, they were denied because they had these drug convictions or old convictions on their record. And so the new law in place now prevents the licensing boards from denying folks for convictions that have been expunged, full stop. And also prevents them from going back farther than 7 years on a person's record. So if you have anything older than 7 years, even if it hasn't been expunged, the licensing boards cannot use those convictions to deny you a license unless they can show that it is directly connected to the work that you're doing. So for example, you have several drug convictions and now you want to be a pharmacist. They can show a direct connection between those two things. But if you want to be a security guard and you had one drug conviction from 20 years ago, they're not going to be able to use that to prevent you from getting your license to be a security guard. So that has been one good success in the last couple of years.
And so this is our last question for the panel. And so after this, I'm going to open it up to the audience for questions, comments, feedback, all of the above. So get thinking. So how do you navigate the challenges of working at a nonprofit while trying to affect systems change? I think we've talked a lot about the nonprofit industrial complex, being beholden to funders, grant deliverables. How do you think about those things?
For me, again, I'm brand new to the practice of law. So I just try to push what we can do, especially if I feel that it's right for us to proceed in this manner. I try to push, kind of like Tyler said before, I try to push the line, right? Or try to get right up to it. I just make sure that every person that I am helping is actually receiving help in all areas. And I see nonprofits, especially one like a legal aid organization, as a resource to provide necessary information for other organizations who are also doing like impact litigation. We can provide things like statistics or anecdotal stories, which are needed and powerful evidence that the system needs to be changed.
Yeah, so basically, like I said before, I am an anarchist. So I try to go, like I said, kind of as far as we can, and noodle my way when we might be over the line a little, because that's what we do as lawyers. The rules are there, but we challenge the laws every day. That's what we do. And the same thing applies with some of the restrictions that we have, and where we can. And I think, so there are those challenges in terms of our restrictions, but there are also the challenges that we have in terms of the work that we do and the way that we tend to internalize our work, because we work so hard and we work so hard for so long that we hit burnout really bad. I had a case of burnout really, really bad last year, actually last year, that really made me want to leave the profession overall after having done this work for so long and being so passionate about wanting to help the community I was faced with this situation of like, am I going to be able to take care of my mental health and like continue to want to do this work? Or am I going to stop being a lawyer overall? And trying to find that balance to take care of yourself while also trying to take care of your community is a challenge that I don't think we talk about too much. I think giving ourselves permission to take that time and understand that you cannot pour into your community if your cup is empty is something that I think we have to think about and learn how to do specifically as nonprofit lawyers in order for us to have that strength and capacity to continue to do the systemic work.
And I would just add, I asked this question at a different panel that I moderated a month ago, and a colleague of mine, Jessica Mark at Bay Area Legal Aid, said that one of the things that she's been thinking long and hard about is we need to be more selective with which grants we apply for and what we write in those applications. And we should be intentionally moving away from quantitative grant deliverables towards qualitative grant deliverables. And, you know, that's something, it's really hard because I think nonprofits all have a scarcity mindset, and we have to get away from that scarcity mindset. We have to try to apply for grants in a way that uplifts our communities and uplifts the people that we serve. And if all of us will only write grant applications that provided qualitative deliverables, then we wouldn't have this problem. If everyone was on the same page, there wouldn't be any choices in the matter. So I'm just plus oneing the wise words of a dear friend of mine, but I think it's worth sharing because I want to spread that message, because if we all started doing that, then we would not be rat racing. We need to move away from that scarcity mindset, and we need to think about how we're holistically moving our communities upwards and forwards.
And I'll just, sorry, add to that. At the very first session yesterday, Ashley said, fund us like you want us to win. And that was like perfectly captured that exact point, is funding us like you want us to do that systemic work and not like you want us to just be capturing data about how bad a problem is. We already know how bad the problem is. What we need to do is do the work to make the changes. And if we're trying to figure out how we can meet these grant deliverables, we're never going to be able to do that.
So with that, I'm gonna open it up for questions, comments.
You're so good. Nobody has questions. I love that.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
This is a question from the Legal Aid DC pod. They want to know how do we ensure systemic policies we push for as an organization or have capacity to push for reflect the needs and desires of our clients?
That's a really good question. And my path to that has been make sure you check in with them before you start pushing forward anything forward. And so that's, you know, being in community with our client base and our community organizations is really important. If you all are LSC funded organizations like Lafla, you are required to have client eligible board members on your board who are there to reflect the client community as well. So, you know, you can check in with individual clients. You're in community with organizations who you meet with regularly and throughout all of these processes. And then also just having those, you know, members of the community who are in your leadership is really important. And if you're a non-LSC funded organization and you don't have that requirement, I still think it's a good idea, because it's a really important part of, you know, of leading any nonprofit is making sure that there's a diverse group of voices that's being heard in big decisions and policies. So You know, one example that I gave before is our, you know, the county meetings that Lafla participates in. We make sure that the community organizations are there in the meetings and they can voice it. And so, you know, we check before we make suggestions, and we check before we file litigation, and half the time they're plaintiffs in our litigation. So those are what our steps are usually, is you know, checking at each level in with community members.
Yeah, absolutely echo that. Because the one thing that we don't want to do is ruin that relationship with the community by basically moving forward with something that we think is a great idea, but is not going to be a great idea for them, or is affecting them in a way that we don't understand. So yeah, definitely always checking them with those community members and listening. I think I said that twice already, but listening is literally so important. And again, it's something that we as attorneys, I don't think, do a great job at. We hear people, we hear because we're looking for those legal issues, but we're not listening to what's going on, and listening to them and making sure the community understands that they are part of this process, and that we're not just doing things because we as lawyers think that that's the best thing to do, is incredibly important.
And to echo both of them, I think it's important to ask individual clients questions about what an ideal policy, or what does this look like for you? What would an ideal policy, or what would an ideal program look like for you? A lot of people don't ask questions, and if we listen, but we're without asking a question, where we don't know what we're actually listening for, if that makes sense. Like, if you ask them the questions that they that we need to hear, and just be humble, right? And ask questions, because they know a lot of them have ideas. So I just try to make an effort to ask them, okay, well, what would an ideal program look like for you or someone in your position? And just listen and take that to heart, write it down, and then bring it up when you're at the table.
I didn't even realize she brought it back.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Rabina Mustafa. I'm with the Detroit Justice Center. And I have kind of a very specific question. I mean, I agree with almost everything that's been set up here. But my specific question is for impact litigation. You were referencing the skimming of bridge cards, but you know, do you feel it is best to, like, the venue for the litigation was it best to do it in state courts? Did you do it in the state court or the federal court?
Yeah, so that was state court litigation, because there is no federal obligation to replace, but California has some good, very general language and some kind of specific language from the old food stamp days, which said that they did have an obligation that was in addition to the feds. And so that's, you know, I wish that we could bring a federal lawsuit, but I think that the way to move this forward federally would be to, you know, move forward with policy. And right now that seems like, you know, FNS is not very receptive to those types of things. So we definitely strategized about like what the options were at the beginning, and ended up going with state court, and now we're able to move forward with state legislation. But you know, we also recognize that like the big goal is nationwide systems change instead of just Republic of California.
Also with, just as a follow-up, in terms of, you know, in terms of strategies, I mean, legislation is being proposed now, but was that even in the works prior to the impact litigation, or was this all simultaneous?
So we were on simultaneous tracks. So we were in talks with the legislator, and then When we won the Court of Appeals, it fast tracked the legislation because they were taking their very sweet time. And once we had already, found an obligation, they were like, oh, now we have this opportunity to move it forward at a much faster speed, which was great.
Okay, so you were kind of like on a multi-track strategy.
Yeah.
While this was going forward. Thank you.
Yeah,
That's
you're
very
welcome.
helpful.
I think she's got a question behind.
Hi, again, I'm Jessica Estes, and I'm Director of Partnerships with Arch City Defenders. And so I'm doing a couple of different roles, but one of my roles is to build out our volunteer lawyer program, so pro bono work. And I saw your facial expressions when that question came up, and the reactions were, I felt what you were saying when you talked about that. And so I kind of have two questions. Since part of my role is to sort of synthesize through the attorneys who might say they want to work with Arch City Defenders. And I should say too, I'm not an attorney, I'm a social worker. Although I've never done traditional social work, I've done organizing work. So my question, part one, is if you had someone to synthesize through the attorneys who might work with you in the future pro bono, what would you want that person to be asking and looking for? And the second question I have is because I'm very curious. In organizer world, we ask questions like, when were you activated? Like, what called you to do this work? And so I'm curious if that's a conversation that attorneys talk about in law school, like how you come to do this type of work, because you could have done anything. You could have done corporate law. So I'm curious about, as I'm having these conversations, as I'm synthesizing, what would you suggest? And what would you have appreciated if someone was doing that for you? Does that make sense?
So I think that the question, the second question that you asked about like what brought you to this work is actually a good question to ask the pro bonos. Like, why is it that you want to use your free time and your knowledge that you paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for to do this for free? To get a really good understanding of, is this an ego thing? Or are you actually committed to the work? Are you looking to learn so that you can figure out ways to better help the community? It is a good question that I think helps you understand motive and drive, because those are the things that we need from pro bono attorneys. They really need to have a similar passion to what a public defender has, that to what a legal aid attorney has. They just are coming with a different legal knowledge. I think something else is getting a good understanding of whether they are willing and ready to do the dirty work and to do the learning aspect. Something that we tend to struggle with a lot with some of our pro bonos is that they don't feel like they need to do our trainings for the work. It's just like, oh, I can go, I know how to fill out forms, I know how to talk to clients. Like they feel like they can do that work, and it's not easy. And it's really important for them to understand cultural competency, to understand harm reduction, and to ensure that they are treating clients humanely and not like a case, but as a person. You are coming in to work on case work, but you are working with our clients. And I know for me, my issue with pro bonos is that I am very, very protective of my clients because they are my community members, they are my family. And so I don't like for people from the outside to come in like, I'm just here to do you a favor. Like, you're not doing me a favor. You're here to do some work, but you're not doing them any favors. They were surviving before you, and they'll continue to survive when you leave and don't come back. So I think getting those folks who are truly interested in doing the holistic work of working with the client and are ready to learn is incredibly important.
And I think that, I guess I'll answer your second question about like, when were you activated? Because I think that is the question. And that's a question that at Lafla, we ask a similar question at all job interviews for even our law students coming in. And I'll just tell you, for me, I was basically born activated. You know, it's the legacy of my grandparents and my parents. My grandparents were the plaintiffs in a desegregation case in the 50s, Tillman versus Wheaton Haven Pool Association. And that was, you know, my legacy growing up was that, like, we are fighting for civil rights, and this is our family. And my dad has done many things in his life that have been the first Black man to do X. And my grandfather was the first Black man to do X. And until the day that there's no more, oh, somebody in your family was the first Black person to do X, I'm going to keep doing this work. So, you know, I think that a lot of people here at this conference come with similar histories, and I love that. And I think that that's hopefully part of this movement lawyering, this moment that we're seeing right now, is that can we get that from our pro bonos? Are there those people who went to law school, they care deeply about this, and then they got lost, or they got crushed by the burden of student debt and sent to go to corporate or government where they could get that paid off? And how do we bring them back and reactivate them and find where that is deep in their souls? Because there's 5,000 of us, but there's a lot more people out there who hopefully have that motivation somewhere inside.
I would say I was activated, I think, by the feeling of helplessness and just growing up with my family. I felt, as I said before, like there was no access to any type of justice because we couldn't afford it. We didn't know anyone who, you know, could help us out with any legal issues. And also just growing up, like going to high school, during high school, my friends had cars and stuff, and we would get pulled over all the time, like all the time. I've been pulled over like more than 5-10 times at least in high school and even undergrad and college. And just that feeling of like not even knowing what I could do, or not even knowing like what officers could do, not knowing my rights, and the feeling of helplessness. I think that helps me to stay activated, actually. So yeah.
And I'll say for me, similar situation. I was born and raised in Compton, and we didn't have a legal aid office at that time, but we used a legal aid person, I guess, like I don't even recall the issue at this point, but we were kind of met with a like, well, this is kind of all that we can do for you kind of thing. Didn't involve direct representation or like what we do now with limited action or anything like that. It was just like, sorry, we can give you this advice and you kind of have to go. And for me, I was like, I don't like that. And so when I made the decision that I wanted to be an attorney and I was, going to law school, I knew that my goal was going to be to go back to my community and be what I didn't see. And tried to change that system to be what I wanted for my family and what I know other community members wanted. So that's where my activation came from, if you will.
Hi, thank you all. This has been really great. I have a question, but not just for you guys. I mean, for anybody here, because I think for a lot of us who work in the nonprofit world, and we've mentioned it before, it can be a nonprofit industrial complex a little bit. Sorry, again, my name is Raven. I'm managing attorney with Urban Justice Center in New York. And excuse me, I'm just getting over cold, not COVID, I tested. And this might be really esoteric and kind of theoretical, but where I struggle with, and I think a lot of us probably struggle with, the reproduction of capitalist, white supremacist, patriarchal values within our organizations. And I'm going to share with y'all like a quick story around that. And we were so frustrated around this issue where in New York, as some of y'all might know, we were the first in the nation to pass right to counsel for housing, for landlord-tenant court. And so, anybody who is out to be sued for eviction, you can get a free attorney. all nonprofit legal service providers in New York City participate in this. You don't have to, but we all do. There's good money in it. We believe in the cause. Cool. So during the pandemic, obviously the world turned upside down. A lot of cases backed up in the courts. And at some point, the courts just decided to sort of push everything through when they just decided, oh, everything's fine. What pandemic? They just decided to push all these cases through. And literally none of the legal service providers had enough attorneys to take these cases. Well, two of the largest legal service providers in New York City simply decided to stop showing up to right to counsel. And that meant that like they have assigned days, like every single legal service provider has an assigned day. They just stopped showing up. And they stopped showing up because they said, well, we don't have enough attorneys. Cool, but what's gonna happen to these tenants? And what they said was effectively, we have the money not to show up. We have our own personal grants, and we know like they give, these $5,000 gala dinners. I mean, that's not us, but and it was so interesting because it was literally myself and my director in our little office came up with an idea, and we said, why don't we just put all these tenants on a wait list and then show up as a friend of the court, tell them, hey, we don't have an attorney that we can assign this case to right now, but we'd like to, just sort of get an adjournment, put the case on ice if we can. It worked to the point where the city was like, hey, we want all legal service providers to do this. So we sat and just thought about it for a minute. It was literally me and my director and an Excel spreadsheet. That's all it was. And now the city's mandating it for everybody. And so I only share that to say, like, how can we hold others in our community accountable? I would love to hear anybody's thoughts around like, how can we look, and I wouldn't say these people are bad actors per se, but there are bad actors, but how can we hold folks accountable and, or not just accountable, but, is there any sort of way that we can think through not calling people out, but in a sense, calling people out when they are reproducing these systems of capitalism, white supremacy, and injustice, and re-traumatizing our already vulnerable populations again. So I don't know. I mean, and like I said, it's esoteric. I don't know if anybody has the answer, but like we were disgusted, and we wanted to tell them that, and we did tell them that, and they don't care because they have endowments. But yeah, anyway.
So I really appreciate your share, and I didn't know that story. So I've left this session learning something, which I appreciate. I would say, I teach a separate lecture on the history of legal aid. And I think that everyone needs to know the history of legal aid. And legal aid started in the 1860s in New York City with white women who were lay lawyers, helping people, giving them cursory advice with the intention of making poor people not uprise. And that's where we came from. And that's where all of our organizations came from. And if we don't know that, we are just feeding the system. And so today, as we operate, we have to know that we are coming from a place where this was a system constructed by white people for white people to keep Black people down. And we have to work every day actively to fight that. And I think that's the same with our partners. If they're coming from that same place of white supremacy that's been there since the 1800s, then we're going to be, in this struggle for a long time. And so, I think deeply about this, and I think that hopefully, we have very good relationships with most of our partner organizations in Los Angeles, where we can have those conversations, where our ED could have those types of conversations. But if not, I think that strategies like the one you said, where you problem solve for your clients on the fly is amazing work, and I commend it. And I think that we also need to be in conversation, for example, not ever writing a grant with those organizations again. Like, can you take that stand? That's like what I was saying earlier, if we only wrote qualitative grants, then we wouldn't have that problem anymore. If nobody else in your area will write a grant with that person as a co-grantor anymore, then they're going to have a problem. They're going to have to make some changes. So I don't have a quick fix, but I loved hearing your story, and I really appreciated you sharing.
Yeah, I agree. I am also a confrontational person. So I am always for calling people out on their shit, especially when you as a legal aid organization will say like, we are here for community, and their mission statement will be all about serving poor people of color and blah, blah, blah. And really just calling them to the mat and just saying like, hey, you're not even living up to your mission. So not even just saying like, hey, you guys are, for lack of better words, fucking around and taking money, but say to them like, you're not even living up to the standards that you've set for yourself. What does that look like? Like, think about how that looks to the rest of the legal community, how that looks to the people that you serve, because those people know, and they're talking and they're telling other people, they don't help us, I'm not going back there. And so having those conversations where you have those relationships is important. And then, like Tyler said, sticking it to them where it counts, where the money is, because that tends to drive change for those types of people.
So I think we have time for maybe one more.
William Waller, Arch City Defenders, and I apologize for being the last comment since it might court some controversy, but this morning was all about dialectics and contradictions. So I've been doing this work for 7.5 years. I've been a litigator for 10 years. I cut my teeth at the public defender's office, the St. Louis City trial office. And so the dialectical tension that I see is, on the one hand, you want people who understand that the legal system is inherently oppressive and designed to do that and is bullshit and are willing to push the boundaries. But on the other hand, you need people who are experienced and aggressive litigators, that what some might say is a traditional white supremacist, like big law approach. I see this all over the place, like with our pro bono efforts, trying to train these transactional attorneys at the big law firms, way more trouble than it was worth. Might as well go to court myself and do it. Yeah,
But it's true, unfortunately.
But also, and there's a lot of like, not to produce anybody who wants to do this work, because you have to start somewhere, and I started somewhere, but there's a lot of young, motivated attorneys who get it, who are on board with the movement, who want to go to court, but they don't have that killer instinct yet. They haven't cultivated it. They don't have the ability to like show the court, that you're serious and you know what you're talking about, and gain the court to take you seriously, where they might give you what your client wants, where opposing counsel fears you, because that is such a crucial variable. We have attorneys who can go to eviction court where nobody has an attorney, and you're going to turn what would be just a perfunctory eviction, they lose their home, into let's talk about how much you're going to pay my client. And cultivating that, the combination in our organizations of people who are feared and can push the boundaries beyond what they currently are, is so important. And maybe it's an impossible problem. I don't know how to do that, but I just wanted to throw that out there as something I think about all the time.
I think that's a really good place to leave this, because nothing at this whole conference is clear or cut and dry. If it was, we wouldn't need to spend 3 days talking about it, right? And I think that is truly, those are all things that we think about, and that's a really important point. And I would just say, I think that all of our organizations need to be having those conversations with attorneys as they start and throughout their career. And there's 3 of us here who flew from LA to talk about these things with everyone. But I think what the future is that our onboarding is talking about the system is broken. We're here to help individual clients. This is how you do systems change. This is why this is all confusing and it's going to be hard, but we're here to work you through the process, and keeping attorneys apprised of this and not letting them learn 10 years into their career that that litigation isn't the only road, but it's a tool we've got. And sometimes if you've got a carrot and a stick, you got to use the stick. And so, but I think that we all need to do a better job at each organization of teaching this to law students as they come in, young attorneys as they come in, and then supporting them as they deal with existential crisis that forces a lot of people to leave civil legal services because we don't get paid enough to do the emotional work that we do, let alone the litigation that we do. So I think you leave us with a good comment and one that we all can chew on for a couple of days. So thank you everyone for coming.
Give me